The Navarin is a Tier 8 premium Soviet battleship and the reward for the ongoing October 2024 campaign. To be honest with you, I don't enjoy playing the ship much. I've played it for a series of games over the past couple of days since the update dropped. I think I've got about 23 games in it, and I am boasting a 70% win rate on the ship, so I don't think it can be that bad after 23 games. I'm sure the win rate will decline as I play more battles, but 70% to begin with is pretty good. So the ship is at least somewhat strong, but there are things that I just don't like very much about it. We're going to run down the stats. Keep in mind they're influenced by my commander build. The commander is Mikhail Kedrov, the brawling Russian battleship commander. We don't have the brawler skill active. We've got the firefighting skill instead in the first slot. We've got Porcupine. We've got the skill that gives you one extra damage control party since we have limited damage con. And then we've got Master Mechanic. For the inspirations, we've got Kedrov is the commander, my apologies. For the inspirations on Kedrov, we have Kondo as one for more concealment, and then Hipper as the other for more secondary range. Of course, you could substitute Kondo out and build for full secondaries on this if you wanted to. I just like the extra concealment. So keep in mind the numbers I give you here are going to be influenced by the Kondo build. To begin with, we've got 69,400 HP. That's maybe a little bit on the low side for a Tier 8 battleship, but we do have some fairly robust armor. The bow and the stern are only 32 millimeters, but we do have an icebreaker on the bow. The deck armor is 35, upper belt I think is 32. It's got fairly thick lower belt armor to protect the citadel. It's enough to bounce most battleship shells. However, you'll notice that the sides of the ship are riddled with flat surfaces. Casemates containing 18 130 millimeter secondaries. And those are just the secondaries in the casemates. It's also got an additional 16 set in 4 double turrets on either side of the ship. So that's a lot of secondaries, but the casemates are key here because they reduce the efficacy of the armor, in my experience. They're so flat and they're at such awkward angles that it doesn't really matter how angled you have the ship relative to the target. If their shells make contact with the casemates, they'll probably penetrate and deal full pen damage. It's a bunch of shell catchers on the side, and that reduces, I think, the efficacy of the armor to some degree. It can be a little bit annoying to take big damage at a decent angle because of that. However, other times they'll miss the casemates and they'll hit the armor and just bounce off harmlessly. So it can be fairly tanky. And then you've got the fast cooling down damage controls to deal with fires and such as you push in. As for the artillery stats, we've got 12 16-inch guns for the main battery. They are set in 3 quadruple turrets, 1 on the front, 2 on the back. You'll notice that the 2 on the back are both flush with the deck. The middle one is not a super firing turret. So if you're facing completely forward or completely backward, you can only get 4 guns on target. You have to be angled to get the rear 2 turrets to fire at the same time. The range on these guns is pretty poor without building into it. 16.7 kilometers. Not a lot at all. And then the reload time is a whopping 35 seconds, which feels kind of bad. However, the turret traverse time with Kedrov at the helm is a speedy 25.9 seconds, and the rear turrets are 360-degree rotating. So if you're pushing in, you can switch all the guns to either side of the ship quite easily and quite quickly. As for the damage on the main battery, the HE shells do a maximum of 5,850, and they've got a 41% fire chance. I haven't really tested out the HE extensively, although I've been thinking about it in about the past 7 games I've played in this thing. The AP shell damage does a maximum of 11,000, which I think is very low for 16-inch guns. Now, to be fair, things like the Minnesota also have 16-inch guns, and it also has 12 of them. But I believe the damage on the Minnesota's guns dwarfs the damage on the Navarin, or at least it's somewhat higher. Yes, it dwarfs the damage on the Navarin. It's 12,800. That seems more like it for 16-inch gun Alpha Strike at Tier 8. The Kansas, on the other hand, another thing with 12 guns but a tier lower, even that gets 11,500 damage per shell for the AP Alpha. The Navarin at 11,000, it just feels a little bit anemic. But that wouldn't be so much of a problem as long as you're hitting the shells. And that's the other thing that I don't really like about the ship. Now, I'm not one to complain too much about battleship accuracy. Battleships are always, as a class, going to be the least accurate ships in the entire game, and it makes sense that it is that way, since the battleship has the power to theoretically remove another ship, like a battleship or a cruiser, from play in the span of one salvo. You don't want them doing that every single time they get a broadside, maybe. So you can see why the RNG is in place. It can be frustrating, to be sure. But on the Navarin in particular, it just seems the accuracy is very poor. Poorer than usual, and I don't even know if this thing gets the usual Soviet gimmick of having better dispersion at closer range. Certainly, if you look at that salvo against the bow-on Yamato, you wouldn't think so. And that's what you see sometimes coming out of these guns. So I was almost wondering whether Kedrov was the right commander for this thing. But then again, it's got all those secondaries. With the secondary build I have using Porcupine on Kedrov, Hipper as an inspiration in the secondary mod, we've got a range of 10.6 kilometers. If you build for full secondaries, it's more like 11, maybe 11.1. That would be using Haruna or that Fernandez guy as inspiration. They reload in 4.8 seconds. Pretty fast, I would say. They're doing a number on this Velos here. And they have a 9% fire chance with maximum HE shell damage of 1,800. They are 130 millimeter guns, or basically typical Soviet destroyer caliber. And they do light a lot of fires. You can see we've got 6 of them so far in this battle. We've got 1 currently burning on Yamato. And they will do damage too. They'll penetrate the superstructures of battleships, penetrate destroyers. You could see the Velos there wasn't enjoying them too much. You've got the secondary consumable that tightens up the accuracy a little bit, and they're decent secondaries, to be sure. It's definitely the gimmick on this ship. This is the only Soviet battleship with secondary power like this, and so I feel like you're incentivized to build for it with Kedrov and Porcupine. However, the main battery just feels really ineffective when you do that. So I tried Galler with the secondary build as well. Of course, the range wouldn't be as long since Galler doesn't have Porcupine. I think I was getting the secondary somewhere over 9 kilometers, which is fine. It's better than typical battleship secondary range and still useful if you're pushing in for close quarters combat. But Galler, with his buffs to the accuracy of the main battery, felt at least a little bit better. I was landing more salvos more consistently at longer ranges and doing more damage, which made the damage output of this thing feel just a little bit better. However, I don't really know which commander I'd like to settle with, to be honest with you. I think there's a good argument for Kedrov, aka the secondaries, and there's a decent argument for Galler, too, aka the poor accuracy on the main battery. So I'm not going to say the ship is bad or anything like that, and there's still some stats left to go over, like the maneuverability. The top speed is not great. It's a base of 27 knots, and this thing appears to bleed a lot of speed in turns. You can see there we were at 21 knots coming out of that turn, and it feels more like 20 knots most of the time. So it does feel a little bit sluggish, which is not necessarily what you want in a brawling battleship, because you want to push in, and you probably want to do that quickly on a flank. You won't do that super quickly in the Navarin. I do have the speed flag on the thing, though, and it's at 28.3 knots. The turning circle is actually fantastic for a Soviet battleship. It's 770 meters. Most of them have a much larger turning circle than that, and the rudder shift is 16 seconds. With Kondo as inspiration in the concealment mod, we've got a sea detectability range of 12.3, which is pretty darn good for Tier 8. However, mostly down to the accuracy of the main battery and the long reload time, I don't find the ship all that enjoyable to play. I don't think it's terrible. I'm not saying you shouldn't pick up the Admiralty backing. You can certainly have fun in this thing. I just don't think it's a ship that I'm going to be playing regularly. The shell catchers on the armor scheme are a little bit irritating. The amount of broadside you have to get all the turrets on target is likewise a little irritating, makes it somewhat difficult at true close quarters combat. And then the accuracy of the main guns, while that is something that doesn't usually bother me, I don't like it in this case. As for this match, I wanted to show it to you because it's very close. It's come down to a little under 5 minutes left to go. There's me and the friendly destroyer, which is a Schultz, versus an enemy destroyer and an enemy cruiser. The red cruiser is Alaska, and the enemy destroyer is Shimakaze. We've got both the Alpha and Bravo caps, and we're ahead on points by a little over 100. However, both the Alaska and Shima were last spotted near Charlie, which is red. So obviously they're going to be pushing in toward Bravo. They're going to get into it and attempt to take it. There's enough time left in this game that I think if they're allowed to flip it, they may be able to overtake us on points. So we have to push in. Now the Schultz thought that was a bad idea. He did tell us to get back, or he's about to do that. However, it's crucial that we take out this Alaska. The Alaska is a gigantic threat to Schultz. He could radar him very easily and take him out quickly. So while the Schultz is spotting the Alaska and while we have range on him, we are going to attempt to take him out. And you'll see it's going to take us a little while because of the poor accuracy on the main battery guns. Shima's spotted in front of us trying to smoke up the Alaska. Doesn't really work if the Alaska continues moving outside of the smoke or fires his main battery, but torpedoes are a concern. We do have to push in maybe a little bit closer to take out Alaska. We want to avoid torpedoes, so we are varying our course and our speed. We mostly avoid the Shima torpedoes. One of them catches us on the bow and does a number. And the Alaska comes out of the smoke broadside in front of us 6 kilometers away, which is, frankly, a gift. We're going to have to turn more to get all the turrets on target, trying to aim at the Alaska's bow, which I believe is only 27 millimeters, so we can overmatch it. Secondaries are going to work. You can see they will do damage when they make contact with a lightly armored ship like a cruiser, and they will, of course, light fires. We've got 7 of them so far in this game. Schultz is also working on Alaska from over there, despite the fact he's got no HP left. And in tandem with our firepower, we are going to be able to take out the Alaska. We're going to see if we can maybe let the secondaries do it as we fire that front turret at Shima. Secondaries are not quite cutting it, so the 2 rear turrets take him out for our 3rd kill of the game. Now the cap is clear. It remains blue. The Schultz is trapped against a rock versus the Shima. Not much we can do about it. The main battery is not going to be good enough to take out the Shima, and he's sailing outside of our secondary range. However, now that the Alaska is eliminated, we had a point swing from that. Schultz goes down, another point swing, but we're still ahead by 200. Less than 2 minutes left to go in the game, and the Bravo cap remains in blue hands. So now at this point, we will turn around and run away. There's no sense in pushing into the Shima. We don't need to sink him in order to win. He needs to sink us in order to win, so we're not going to play into his hands by sailing into his torpedoes. If we sail away, he's going to have a much more difficult to impossible time of hitting us with the torpedoes, and we should be able to escape with the rest of our HP intact. Nothing Shima can do. The game is wrapped up, and we are victorious as long as we ride off into the sunset, which we are going to do. As for the Navarin itself, I'm not going to not recommend that you pick up the Admiralty backing for this one. Your mileage may vary. I know there are a lot of people out there who just love the brawling secondary battleship playstyle, and this thing certainly fits that playstyle. It just could be a little bit better. If not having better damage on the main battery, which I would like to see, then at least maybe some better accuracy so I could get some more consistency out of it while building into secondaries. That is my main gripe with the ship, along with the outdated World War I style casemate armor scheme, which is not ideal. But it's certainly not the worst ship in the world. It's also not the best campaign ship they've released this year, nor is it probably the most competitive ship out there. I think there are some better Tier 8 battleships out there. So, your mileage may vary on the thing. You may disagree with me. Feel free to let me know in the comments. I don't really know what the public sentiment is on the Navarin these days, but I'm not its biggest fan, to be sure. However, hope you enjoyed this battle. I thought it would be interesting to show in the final few moments to elaborate on the thought process there. It's about, winning games when you've got the victory, not giving it up to the enemy. So, hope you enjoyed it. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.